Mr. Khalil, greetings and great to see you on First Western.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Вітаю.
Вітаю вас. I would like to start with the people of Australia attitude towards the war in Ukraine. How do the people and politicians in Australia react to the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, the reaction of the Australian people was one of horror, rejection of what Putin has done, the horrible, immoral invasion of Ukraine, of their neighbour. And the Australian people have given full support, very strong sentiment of support for the people of Ukraine, as has the political leadership of our country. The Ukrainian people, led by your President Zelensky, have really displayed extraordinary strength and courage, bravery. And the Australian people have reacted to that, have been so inspired and with admiration of the Ukrainian people and their struggle to stand and defend their territory and to end this war. And we continue, I think, as a nation, as an Australian nation, to stand with the people of Ukraine in doing that. And we have called, the Australian people and the governments of Australia has called again and again for Russia to withdraw its forces from Ukrainian territory and to end the war. And I think, as well as the sentiment, Daniel, of the Australian people being so strongly supportive of Ukraine, the action has been backed up, the sentiment. So we have provided, as a government, Australia has committed over over $500 billion in military assistance, humanitarian assistance with coal and other energy products, as well as other technical assistance, as well as training of Ukrainian forces as well by Australian military. So our support for Ukraine is to stand with the people of Ukraine in your struggle, but also to back up that support with real action and support for the military and the struggle that you are going through.
Thank you for your support and support of your government of Ukraine. Let's cover our main topic, security assistance to our country. It's 7 months since Australian government contributed the most significant security assistance for Ukraine. When could we expect a new security contribution from Australian government?
Well, that's a very good question. I am arguing, as you'd be no surprise, for further assistance to Ukraine. That's something I'm very passionate about, as are many of my colleagues, that we need to provide more assistance to Ukraine, given the summer offensive and counter-offensives that you are facing over the next couple of months. It is a critical time in the war. And I think the meaningfulness of the support, the substance of the support is very critical during this period in the war, this juncture in the war. I know that, as I said, Australia has been one of the largest contributors, military contributors, non-NATO military contributors to Ukraine. And my understanding is that the Australian government is working very closely now as we speak with the Ukrainian government about how we can best make a contribution going forward in the war effort, and with an understanding that this is going to be a protracted or a long conflict, and how we can contribute as best as we can to support Ukraine. The Australian government is delivering on a number of the commitments that we've already made in the contribution. And the Albanese government, it's a new government in Australia, since it's come to office, has doubled the military contribution to Ukraine. And I think what's happening now, Daniel, for your viewers to understand, is that our government is talking to your government, our Prime Minister, and our government is talking to your President and government about our response in relation to the evolving situation over the coming months. And I'm strongly arguing for more support for Ukraine, given the critical nature of the war over the next couple of months.
Also, I know that the last week was a budget one in the parliament. Did Australian Parliament include some money for Ukraine in the budget for the next year?
There has been money that was included in the budget for the ongoing contribution that we're making to Ukraine, but any new package of support is something that is being discussed right now as far as what the contribution will be going forward in this conflict.
Also, I know that Ukrainians in Australia and Ukraine call Australian government to provide us with Hawkeye armored vehicles. Why does Australian government hesitate to provide such vehicles, and would you be in favor of providing such security assistance for us?
Yes, so the Australian government has provided a commitment of some 90 Bushmasters. We know how effective the Bushmasters are or have been in Ukraine for the Ukrainian Defence Forces. We've provided obviously over $500 billion in military assistance. The Hawkeys are a type of vehicle that also would be quite useful. There's some negotiations and discussions about the Hawkeys, as well as other types of assistance, military assistance in the contribution going forward. That's a discussion that is happening between the governments right now. As I said, I am very supportive of providing Ukraine with further military assistance and humanitarian assistance, and I think the negotiations are occurring now. Our Defence Minister has also been discussing in the media the fact that they are in discussions with the Ukrainian defence officials and ministry around the need, what is needed in the contribution going forward in the conflict. So there will be, I hope, very strong support on an ongoing basis for Ukraine from the Australian government.
You mentioned about Bushmasters. They were really effective during our last counteroffensive. They helped us to liberate Kharkiv region, but our defense minister says that we need more that Bushmasters. So are such Bushmasters on the table on the defense ministry?
My understanding, Daniel, is that there have been some 70 of the Bushmasters deployed. There's still some more to be deployed as part of the original commitment, so there'll be more Bushmasters being delivered. That's obviously the confidentiality around the delivery of those for obvious operational reasons. There are also drones that are part of the support package, as well as the training, which I mentioned, but importantly, other technical type equipment and assets around cyber security and cyber defence, which is also very important. But yes, the Bushmasters have been very effective. They're a wonderful capability and have been very, very helpful to the Ukrainian Defence Forces in your operations.
Also, in the world, there is a tank coalition. The US, Great Britain, and many European countries provided Ukraine with modern Western tanks. Would you support possible joining of Australia to this coalition and providing us also modern Western tanks?
Yes, I'm aware of the tank coalition. I think it's a very important capability for Ukrainian Defence Forces, particularly coming up in the offensives, summer offensive, in the southern wing, southern part, and the east as well. The flat area of Ukraine is ideal for tank capability. And so I've argued, of course, that this is an important capability. If there is an opportunity for Australia to provide that support, that contribution, that's something I'm very supportive of. Again, the negotiations are occurring between the governments, so that's something that is between the Minister for Defence and the Ministries of Defence and our ministries as well around the level of contribution and what's included in it. But tanks would be modern tanks, M1A1s, would be very, very useful for Ukraine.
Also, Ukraine calls Western leaders to organize training program for our pilots. Great Britain announced that it will organize such training program. Also, France is considering such move. Would you support, and could Australian government consider a possible organization of such training program for our pilots?
Yeah, so that's another element of what would be made up in a package. So let me put it to you this way. I support a whole raft of measures that would be of assistance to Ukraine. So Hawkeyes, Bushmasters, potential discussion around tanks, training, pilot training, cybersecurity elements, drones, body armor, a whole range of elements of a package would be very, very useful for Ukraine. That's something I've argued for, and the importance of this package of support for these summer months. Because frankly, as you know, and the people of Ukraine know, that these next couple of months are quite critical, because the gains and losses made over summer tend to be frozen when the winter sets in. And so it's important that Ukraine is given every advantage, every support over the next couple of months. So, to answer your question, everything should be on the table as far as I'm concerned. And I know our government is discussing our contribution, our ongoing contribution with the Ukrainian government. And for my part, I have been a voice of support for a package to support Ukraine in the coming months.
Also, speaking about air contribution, Australian media reports that dozens of F18 Hornet jets are in storage in Australia. Australian Army doesn't use them and plans to sell them or even to utilize them. Don't you think that it would be better to provide at least a part of such jets to Ukraine to help our soldiers to close our skies?
Yeah, I understand the need for the Ukrainian air defense and air force to get more capability and more equipment. That's certainly a very important need. Again, as I said in my previous answer, the package of support, the contribution that is made is currently being negotiated between the two governments. So obviously for operational and other sort of classified reasons, I can't speak to that right now. It's a discussion between our government and your government as to the details of our ongoing contribution. But as I said earlier, I think whatever can be put on the table should be put on the table in that discussion. And that's something I have made that case publicly and internally to my government.
Also, I would like to cover possible defense cooperation between Ukraine and Australia. There is a strong such cooperation between the US and Australia. Both countries are working closely together to develop a high-precision missile with range up to 500 kilometers. Could Australia also cooperate with Ukraine on such military projects?
Yeah, the need for working together with partners on missile technology, missile capability is one that is really, really important because of the fact that there is a supply shortage of missiles, as we know globally, and also the need for research in areas of missile technology, whether it be counter hypersonics or hypersonics research, is of a critical nature, as we've seen in the use of missiles in the operating theatre. I think the other element of what's happened is, as far as our relationship with Ukraine, our defence relationship, which has really, by necessity, because of the war, been enhanced. I mentioned earlier that some hundreds of Ukrainian recruits have been graduated from military training with Australian officers and the Australian Defence Force personnel as part of the contribution to the UK-led multinational training program. When you have those relationships at the level of the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, those relationships matter because they can be expanded into areas of cooperation at a government-to-government level, whether it's missile technology, whether it's training, whether it's capability, coordination around capability. So I am very, very confident that the relationships we have built with our partners in Ukraine and the bravery that we've seen from Ukraine will lead to further levels of cooperation around things like missiles and drones and others. For example, drone technology is very important for the Ukrainian Defence Forces. There is an Australian company which is manufacturing drones, thousands of drones that are being used by the Ukrainian Defence Forces, small, lightweight drones that are used for all sorts of missions, including reconnaissance, intelligence, surveillance, dropping even blood supplies to Ukrainian troops from the drones themselves. They can have a 3-kilogram payload. So these types of technologies from companies in Australia and coordinating with Ukraine are so important in our relationship.
Also, I would like to cover intelligence cooperation between Ukraine and Australia. There is a strong intelligence sharing between the US and Ukraine. Is there such intelligence sharing between Ukraine and Australia today?
Well, again, limited about how much I can speak to this particular issue given the operational nature of some of our engagement. But as I'm the chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee of our Parliament, I know that the Five Eyes relationship, Australia, US, Canada, UK, New Zealand, is a very strong one, and their engagement in support of the Ukrainian war effort is one that is a strong commitment from all of the partners that I've mentioned. And there are elements of engagement with our security agencies, our intelligence agencies, certainly around cybersecurity as well, cyber defence, which we've provided some assistance, equipment that has been, I think, important for you to improve cybersecurity and border operations for Ukraine have been provided by Australia as well in that space. And there are other projects, if you like, missions that have been there to support the war effort in that space, but it's probably best not to talk too much about them given the sensitive nature of those projects.
You mentioned about a Five Eyes intelligence alliance. Would you be in favor of Ukraine becoming a close partner or in the future maybe even a member of a Five Eyes intelligence alliance?
Well, I could say this. I think the by necessity, by the fact that Ukraine has fought this fight against the oppressor, against the invader, there has been organic engagement and building of the relationship with the Five Eyes partners and with Australia and with the US and many other partners, which is, you wouldn't have predicted that 5 or 10 years ago. It would not have existed. But the engagement now is much closer. The relationship with the security, intelligence, military coordination relationship is very, very strong because of the war effort, the joint effort that we're all making to support Ukraine. I would hope that in the future, those arrangements will continue as a partner. That's something I'd be interested to see. We don't want to lose the relationships that we've built with our Ukrainian partners, and that's something that can be carried forward into the future.
Let's move forward with the sanctions policy of Australia. G7 members and the European Union is preparing new sanctions against Russia. Does Australian government plan to strengthen sanctions against Russian regime?
Yes, and we have actually applied some very strong sanctions on the Russian regime through the Magnitsky laws. That you'd be aware, we passed Magnitsky laws in Australia last year. We're using the Magnitsky laws to apply sanctions on Putin and all the people around him and the key people, as well as their family members. There are strong financial sanctions in place. And I should add too, we've also welcomed the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issuance of an arrest warrant for President Putin and the Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, given that the court has reasonable grounds that Putin and Lvova-Belova are individually criminally responsible for war crimes. And that court decision is a big step forward for justice for Ukraine and its people. And that support by Australia extends, frankly, to the fact that our own assessment is that there is clear evidence of war crimes in Ukraine, torture, mass executions, rape, deliberate shelling of civilians, forced deportations, and Australia, and our position as a government is to strongly support accountability for Russia's crimes and Putin's crimes. That's why we joined 42 other international partners to refer the situation in Ukraine to the International Criminal Court back in March last year. And we've also committed money, funding for professional staff to the ICC to support the investigation of the crimes in Ukraine. So that's a really important development as well. I think in the international level, whether it's the International Criminal Court or the United Nations resolutions to extend the mandate for the Independent International Commission of Inquiry into violations of abuses and human rights abuses and international humanitarian law breaches, which was just passed recently on 4th of April, we're doing everything we can with our partners to ensure that Russia's actions are held accountable. Everything possible under international law, under the international architecture, our diplomacy. And of course, we are very, very disturbed by the Commission's findings in mid-March that Russian authorities have committed violations of international humanitarian law, and many of which are war crimes. They amount to war crimes. So our effort there is to support Ukraine through the international effort on sanctions, financial sanctions, Magnitsky Law sanctions on individuals, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations. They must be held to account for the crimes they have committed, and the international community cannot stop that effort. Even if this war ends tomorrow, there must be justice for Ukraine.
Also, Australia has imposed sanctions on Iran over providing Russia with lethal aid.
Right.
Are such sanctions being effective, and does Australian government plan to continue the sanctions against Iran?
Yes, to your question, the sanctions on Iran are continuing. We identified that Iran was providing Russia with drones that were being used in their operations that were attacking civilians, and we applied sanctions to Iran on that basis. They will continue. This is a really important element because it's not just about Russia, it's all of those partners or countries that would provide assistance to Russia during this period. And that's a very critical part of the international effort, the international community's effort to support Ukraine.
Thank you. And my last question for you will be, what is the best way to avoid such war happening again in Europe, and how could Australia play its role in providing Ukraine with security guarantees and help us to avoid such war happening in the future?
That's an important question, Danielle, because my criticism over the past 10 years is that Putin was allowed to get away with incremental crimes, incursions, actions which were not held accountable by the West. And whether it was taking Crimea, whether it was the actions that he undertook in Syria, he kept getting away with it. So the way to avoid this type of war in the future is for liberal democracies, Western democracies around the world and democracies around the world to stand firm in their protection and defense of a liberal rules-based order of international law, international human rights, international rule of law, a respect for sovereign integrity, territorial integrity and sovereignty of nations, and the right to self-determination, and the absolute defense of that order to prevent countries like Russia breaching those laws to get their own strategic objectives through the use of force. We must, as an international community and the democracy, stand together against the rise of authoritarian regimes and defend that liberal rules-based order. That's how you prevent it. And I think what we've seen with the war in Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine, the immoral invasion of Ukraine, the aggressive, brutal invasion of Ukraine, is that the democracies of the world have woken up. Have woken up from a slumber, they've woken up from complacency, and they have said enough. And they are supporting Ukraine because Ukraine is on the front line against these authoritarian regimes. And our partners will continue to empower Ukraine to resolve the conflict on its own terms. And any post-war security guarantees obviously are a matter for Ukraine, but you will know that the democracies of the world stand firmly with Ukraine with respect to their bravery and their courage in fighting for their sovereignty and their territorial integrity and for their people. And we'll continue to work with you on that basis. to reach our lasting and just peace in Ukraine. And so, as I said before at the start, the Australian people are with you. We stand with you in solidarity with you, but also in substance in our support with you. And I say, Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава! Thank you, Mr. Khalil, for your support and for being with us today, and glory to Ukraine again.
Дякую. Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава! Thank you very much.